Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Superstar Ultra. In the last part, we started off Milky Way Wishes! And now it's time for us to go after the next set of levels. Also notably, you can see the Sun and Moon fighting over Popstar at all times. Not that it really matters that you can. You actually can't do anything in Popstar, it's not even like a little save door. For now, it's time for us to head into Sky High and grab our next few new abilities, and move on in the chain. So at this point, we're getting close to the end of what the scale of the original Kirby Superstar was. There was only one little thing we unlock after Milky Way Wishes, and that's technically required for 100% anyway. So I think it's about this time we should talk about something we only found out about in the last, 5 years or so. Back near the release of the SNES Classic, Sakurai revealed some old game design documents for Kirby Superstar, and in it we learned about a cancelled mini-campaign for it known as Kagero Mansion. The entire deal with it was going to be a puzzle action platformer, where because of some magic spell that a clock put on Kirby, he was not going to be able to use his mouth whatsoever. He wouldn't be able to inhale enemies for copy abilities, he would get them through other means like absorbing fire through a candle, and he wouldn't be able to puff up and fly, so you'd only have to rely on his normal jump. It was going to be horror-themed as well, which would have been interesting to see, and especially considering that's kind of like the one thing this campaign's lacking overall, isn't it? But ultimately, it never made it past the concept phase. All we have is, a rough plot synopsis and some concept art. Could have been neat to see, but ultimately just never showed up in the series. They have sort of revisited some aesthetics from it down the line. I think there's a Ghost Mansion in Epic Yarn, and I want to say Mass Attack had a stage somewhat like that I've seen over the years. But the actual concept itself has never been really revisited, and that's a shame because I think there's some potential there for a mini-game at the least. Or maybe they could do something like not Kirby Superstar, Donkey Kong Country, rather, where throughout the game there's maybe one level per world where you just can't use copy abilities through the normal means like that. It could be something just to help spice stuff up, because Kirby doesn't really tend to do a lot of gimmick levels to begin with, barring, using a game gimmick. The closest you overall get, really, is the individual game gimmicks, and if they're more prevalently featured in a level, like I can't remember the name of the super abilities from Return to Dreamland, but those, the robot from Robobop, things like that. I think there's some real potential there. By the way, I get this, the Sky Levels boss is Krako, a very original Kirby game. Something I do want to take a second to appreciate, though. I really appreciate what Sakurai started doing with his YouTube channel once that got announced and started off. We're not only talking about gameplay design tips and the tricks he's learned over the years, but I really appreciate him actually openly talking about the development of the games he's directly worked on. At the time of the recording this, the most recent uploaded one was the Kirby Air Ride one, which I believe next is Meteos in that case? Because I feel like there's a lot of developers, even on the macro scale, who don't do enough of that. Most of the time, whenever we learn things about a game's development, it's stuff we learn while it's in development or getting close to release, like how they got this composer for the game, or what the initial concept was. I really like whenever games get postmortems like that, and we've gotten a few more of those over the years as time has gone to begin with. But I really appreciate Sakurai just directly doing it himself, where we even, I think in the Melee video he did, saw storyboards for the intro cinematic, and it's not many would probably even have the pull to do that outside of, Miyamoto, if he ever did something similar, which I highly doubt he will. It's we've gotten some tips and tricks in that regards, too, when it comes to developers here and there on, social media. There was a thread sometime in 2022, if memory serves, I want to say it was towards the end of it, where one of the Metroid Prime developers, showed off a lot of the behind-the-scenes of how this thing worked, or how that thing works, especially when it came to some of the visors. And I just love reading that stuff, because like I mentioned way back when I started college, I originally started going to college for game design. I eventually transferred out of that and went into communications design, then graphic design ultimately. But even though I left that game design majors because I didn't see myself working out with it well too much, I love hearing what people do in that field. I think I even said it earlier in this LP, the most interesting creative industries to me are video games and movies, because there's just so much more behind the scenes to that than there are usually for, music or art. Not that there's not those for, music and general artistry, but there's more of it because it's more of a team kind of deal. Time for some more use of wings jump to get through some blocks. And obviously I missed talking about it a moment ago, but this is actually one of the stages that has one of the hardest to find copy abilities in it. Because you need to get that invincibility candy and then run through the lava below you when you get it. And there's not really much of an indication you can do that without just seeing the door and going, I guess I can do that? It's not exactly the most well telegraphed, but there's not many things you could do, I guess. If anything, I'm glad that's like the only instance of something that's that, not like esoteric, that's not the word I'm looking for, but risky, I guess. Most of the other power-ups in the game, even in like Great Cave, are pretty like straightforward to get. Don't get the obsession with the mine carts though. Because even in Great Cave, they're slower to use than just running all over the place. The cat is climbing my chair. What do you want, kitty? You want some food? I already fed you today, but I'll give you a snack once I'm done with this recording. Is that okay, kitty? Suplex is probably the copy ability I use the least overall throughout the game. And that's a shame because Reserve Sakurai's even gone on a statement saying it's basically one of his favorites to use in this particular entry, even though his favorite power-up period is Beam. Because there's a lot of different throws it can do that's just based off how you grab the enemy or what buttons you're holding while you do it. I just never bothered to remember anything. If memory serves, it does have good damage output. It's just that its attack's also kind of limited for boss fights from memory. At the end of the day, Spark's my go-to. Or Jet. Spark and Jet, really. It's time for Chameleon Armageddon. This time he's red, and that's all that's different. I'm only now noticing he's also in the background on the little mural with some apples. Is that meant to be a UFO on the row above that, or is that meant to be Wham Bam Rock? Something else I'm only now just realizing I haven't talked about yet. I've talked about the fact that there's a lot of, like, reused hats for the copy abilities in the game. But something I haven't talked about purely is that this is the game that introduced copy ability hats, at least in the original Superstar, because in Adventure, they didn't have hats. It was just, you got the icon and you could use the power. And it's kind of funny how that's just become so synonymous with the series for being what was just meant to be sort of a way to differentiate between powers, so helpers could have more of a purpose as well. Even though, as Sakurai himself has said, that caused some problems when it came to Smash, but oh well. Kirby bosses are always kind of weird to me because they're very similar to Mega Man bosses to me, in that on a first run, they seem like they're moving at complete random, but their patterns are much more easy to discern than a lot of other platforming bosses. It's just the moment of first exposure that really messes with you. I had a similar experience thinking about it in Blaster Master 03. Its penultimate boss fight in the true ending. When I first tried to beat that, it was chaotic hellscape. Second time around, after like a day's break, I realized, oh, I see the pattern now. With that said, welcome to Cavius. This is easily the least original planet out of the set because it's just a mini-boss rush. There are rooms littered all over this planet's layout that all have one of the various mini-boss enemies in it. Chef Kawasaki's, Bonkers's, which one do we got here? Mr. Frosty! Ultimately, enemies you should be used to fighting by now. That does mean ultimately the bosses go down pretty quickly, because not only are you used to them by now, but you probably have a couple of abilities by this point that can deal some good damage. The biggest annoyance here is actually trying to remember where you're going, because this is easily the most literally maze-like planet out of the entire set. Also, for some reason, this is not the first time I've said that this week about a video game, but the main little, like, instrument in the background of this song reminds me a lot of the Ape Escape 1 soundtrack. The other game that's been doing that to me recently, I've been replaying Mega Man Star Force 1 over on the stream side of things. And there's a couple of instruments in that game's soundtrack that are like the exact same electronic instruments, and it's good to hear that stuff again, honestly. Feels like we kind of lack that type of music in a lot of games nowadays, at least in terms of like the major releases. They usually go for the hard rock or orchestral in most cases. At least indie games usually have me covered with that. Like, I'm really looking forward to Gravity Circuit, as well as the new little Nemo game, and admittedly one of the only Kickstarter games I've backed, Double Shake, which is a big send-up to, like, Klonoa-esque games I'm looking forward to eventually, probably doing something on that once it's released. There is a part of me that wonders if the various planets here in Milky Way Wishes aren't just, like, based off the usual level themes like grass, water, and all that. I wonder if they're also slightly internally based off the individual mini-campaigns themselves in aesthetic. Like, you got Spring Breeze and Floria. This could easily be based off the thing you unlock after Milky Way Wishes, in a way. Cavius, not Cavius, the one can be based off Great Cave Offensive, the fire one. At least slightly. It seems very unlikely, but that's a theory I've had since I was a kid. Because it would be kind of nice to have it be a little summative experience of the entire journey in the original Kirby Superstar. Also, in the case you're just trying to, like, literally finish all the levels, not get 100% in Milky Way Wishes for whatever reason, that Bugsy there is the enemy you're looking for, because that's the one that spawns the door to get out of this area. But we still need to look around in this area a little bit, because one of the abilities is still around here, and it's one I really want, even on top of getting 100%. And if you can take a look at that little peg there, you can probably guess what it is. It's time for Bonkers, because beating him unlocks the ability to get Hammer, which I'm going to use a lot. There we go, baby! For a while there, honestly, though, there was a good period of time, like I mentioned before, I wanted to do this game with Scott as a 2-player LP. And I was completely just content with doing the Super Nintendo version for years until I managed to get DS stuff working reliably on emulators and stuff, and especially recording-wise. Thank you, OBS. The DS stuff is such a weird paradigm to get into, though, editing-wise, because you have to switch screens more regularly, and you have to design around it more visually, I find. That's why we get more of these unique layouts for whenever I do a DS game, rather than just a generic background for the console. In fact, I probably should talk about that more outright. My rules when it comes to making the overlays for the videos, I have generic ones for basically every single console I would want one for, but I will make a unique one by and large if the game's gonna be 5 parts or longer. But DS games basically force me to make something, if only because a generic DS background would look kind of bad in my eyes. Getting into, like, graphic design stuff, and even then, I'm looking at the Kirby one that's on the video right now, and there's some stuff for Rails I could have done that's a little different and better, but oh well, we're already this far into the project. Boss Acabius is Wham Bam Rock once again. You know, at least he's not a boss that's been hammered in yet, even though we're hammering him in right now. Because this is only the second time we fought him versus a lot of the other bosses. 3rd, 4th, maybe more. That is something at least I can give Kirby Amazing Mirror. You can fight the bosses numerous times, if memory serves, but you only need to fight them all once in order to get 100%. Most of the time you're just fighting either repeats of Shadow Kirby or the various mini-boss type enemies, and I appreciate Amazing Mirror for that at the least. In fact, that's a really cool thing, because that's the only way you can get the Smash power-up in Amazing Mirror. That's Cavius. It can be a little hard to find your way around in, but nothing too bad overall. Again, at its hardest, Kirby Superstar Ultra is by and large like a 4 on the difficulty scale, 6 at its general highest peak. Its absolute highest, though, is an 8, and that's only in one particular mode we've yet to access. With that said, time for Planet Mecca, which is the secondary reason I have that theory about each of the planets being based off a mini-campaign in some form. Because this is the Revenge of Meta-Knight to, or Meta-Knight's Revenge, whichever it is, to Floria's Spring Breeze. A lot of bottomless pits in this stage below you, so always be flying. Make sure you use the cannons to get around quickly. There's a couple of items I'm not sure how you're supposed to get, though. I think maybe, actually, now I'm thinking about it, you can just enter the door I'm about to go into again once you're on the other side to get all those other items. Yeah, no, you can't do that, so I don't know how you're meant to get those, besides maybe having a second player at the ready. Ultimately, the hardest thing this particular world does, outside of trying to get into this door with the wind, is it revisits one particular room from Meta-Knight's Revenge, which was, I think in the second of the 2 videos we were in that stage for, where we had that giant chain of switches you need to press in order to get through several doors in a row. However, whereas in that case, I think you can scoot by without needing to hit the switches. It's just a slower pathway that gets against the timer. You need to hit all these switches in a row, I think. I might even have those instances backwards now that I think about it. But oh well. I guess something I haven't really gone in depth about in general is some of the stuff about the helper system. Like, I've talked about that it's what second players are controlling in the Super Nintendo version, barring the use of yellow Kirby, I think, here in Superstar Ultra. But something I should note is that the camera in general will always follow Kirby no matter which version of the game you're playing. So it's closer to Subspace Emissary would be in that regard, where there's always one person directly leading the charge, which is a little annoying, but oh well. Additionally, if a helper's off-screen, they slowly take damage, but if they're too far off-screen, they'll just get warped right to Kirby anyway, so kind of makes the HP drain not that big of a threat, especially if Kirby's moving fast enough with certain abilities. I know it's entirely because this area was in Subspace Emissary, by the way. But that elevator section right there, because this entire room is just nothing but floors of mini-bosses just about, reminds me a lot of the Great Maze in a way I don't like. One day I'll get back to doing Smash stuff on the channel, because I did a playthrough of the arcade mode of Smash 64 years ago at this point. That was like first 2 years of the channel. And I've been meaning to go do something with Melee, do all the events or something, then get into like Subspace and stuff. But I just haven't because I can only take so much Smash at a time. Time for Heavy Lobster again. Great. We haven't seen this fight enough already. Like the fight in Meta-Knight's Revenge, though, you can still get the paint power-up from this particular fight, so you can make it a little easier on yourself. But this is where I also really start to remember to use my guard a lot, because you can just completely clip through his hitbox if you do that. I'm also only now realizing that the background there is making a lot of Heavy Lobsters. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 9, if memory serves, we're going to go finish off Milky Way Wishes. See you guys then.